Captain Jake Lawson stood on the bridge of the USS Aegis, staring out into the vastness of space. The hum of the ship's engines was a constant reminder of how far humanity had come, from fledgling explorers to respected members of the interstellar community. Or so they thought. The peace talks at the Intergalactic summit had been tedious, with alien factions arguing over trade routes and mining rights. But the arrival of the signal from Erebus 9 shifted everything. The message wasn't just an ordinary distress call. It was something deeply unsettling, its origins unmistakably human. Despite humanity's relatively recent presence in the stars, the signal carried a strange familiarity. It was coded in an ancient dialect, one that shouldn't have existed in the galaxy anymore. "Captain, we've pinpointed the source of the transmission," came the voice of Commander Sarah Richards, Lawson's trusted second-in-command. "It's coming from the Erebus system." Coordinates locked. Lawson's gaze turned toward the holographic map, his brow furrowing. Erebus 9 was an abandoned planet, long believed to have been the site of an extinct alien species that never advanced beyond primitive tools. Humanity had never ventured there, and none of the galaxy's other species had ever made any claims. Yet here it was, a distress signal from a planet that should have been lifeless. "Set a course for Erebus 9, maximum speed," Lawson ordered, already feeling a sense of unease gnawing at him. This wasn't supposed to be part of the diplomatic agenda. On the journey, Professor Emily Clark, a renowned archaeologist, began poring over the data. Her expertise was invaluable for deciphering the ancient texts, but even she was struggling. "This language," she said softly, "is more than just old. It's human. Ancient Earth, a dialect from pre-space travel." The realization hit Lawson like a ton of bricks. Humanity's past was more complicated than anyone had thought, and someone, somewhere, was going to great lengths to keep it buried. The US Aegis dropped out of warp above Erebus 9. The planet's barren surface sprawled below like a dead, cracked shell. The once promising world was a shadow of its former self, scared by millennia of neglect. No signs of life existed, only towering ruins and scattered remnants of what had once been an advanced civilization, though none of the records had ever suggested humans had ever been there. Captain Jake Lawson stood at the helm, staring at the stark desolation below. "Commander Richards, prepare a landing party," he said, his voice steady but thick with anticipation. Within hours, Lawson, Professor Emily Clark, and a small team of scientists and security personnel descended in the Shuttle Odyssey, the atmosphere crackling as the ship broke through the planet's thin atmosphere. As they neared the surface, the landscape began to reveal itself. Towering stone structures, broken pillars, and vast, labyrinthine hallways buried beneath mounds of sand and dust. "This doesn't make sense," Clark murmured, scanning the horizon with her handheld device. "These ruins are clearly human-made, but they're far older than anything Earth has ever recorded. This architecture, it's archaic, yet sophisticated." The shuttle landed beside what appeared to be an enormous temple, half submerged in the earth. The entrance loomed ahead, a massive stone door engraved with symbols that resembled early human language, yet were far more intricate and precise. As the crew stepped inside, they were greeted by eerie silence. The air was thick with the weight of time. Inside, the walls were adorned with murals that depicted scenes of humans, dressed in strange, elaborate garb, working alongside other alien species. Alien species who looked far too familiar. Some of them even appeared to be early versions of races still present in the galaxy today. Clark's voice trembled as she made the connection. "These aren't just human ruins. They're evidence of something far greater. This is where it all began." But before she could continue, an explosion shattered the silence, and the ground beneath them trembled. The Vecna, the mercenary race from the summit, had found them. And they weren't here for an archaeological dig. The explosion sent the landing party sprawling, the ground shaking as a cloud of dust and debris erupted into the air. Captain Jake Lawson barely managed to keep his balance as the stone walls of the ancient temple cracked and groaned. The team scrambled to their feet, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of movement. "Report," Lawson barked, his voice sharp. Lieutenant Marco Sanchez, a seasoned security officer, was the first to respond, checking the scanners. "Enemy presence, Captain. A large group, Vecna, heavily armed, moving in from the northeast. They're closing in fast." Professor Emily Clark was already moving towards a set of intricately carved stone doors on the far side of the chamber. These markings, they matched the ones on the walls outside. "We need to get inside. There's something here, something important." Lawson nodded. "Get the doors open. Sanchez, cover R6. As Clark worked feverishly to decipher the mechanism of the ancient door, the sound of marching footsteps grew louder, echoing off the stone. The Vecna were close, their low growls and harsh voices unmistakable. The species was known for their brutal tactics and overwhelming firepower, and they had no interest in preserving ancient relics. They were here to take whatever valuable technology they could find. With a hiss of ancient machinery, the stone doors finally slid open, revealing a vast chamber bathed in an eerie blue light. Inside, towering structures of crystalline material shimmered, and at the center of the room lay a massive, floating sphere, covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. Clark's eyes widened. This is it. This is the core of their technology. But before they could investigate further, the Vecna arrived, weapons raised. The Vecna captain, a hulking brute named Zarek, stepped forward, a cruel smile curling his lips. "Human fools," Zarek growled in a guttural voice. "You've stumbled upon something far beyond your comprehension. Now, you will die for it." Lawson's hand moved to his sidearm, but before he could act, Zarek raised a strange, glowing device. The ground beneath them shifted violently. The Vecna had no intention of negotiating. They were going to wipe them out and take everything for themselves. The chamber was filled with a blinding light. As the battle began, the Vecna captain Zarek's weapon pulsed with violent energy, sending cracks through the floor beneath them. As the humans scattered, trying to avoid the blasts, Captain Jake Lawson barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Take cover. Move now." Lieutenant Marco Sanchez sprinted toward the nearest pillar, firing back with his blaster. The Vecna soldiers, with their inhuman reflexes and advanced weaponry, retaliated with deadly precision. Lawson saw Clark duck behind a column, clutching her scanner, desperately trying to collect data on the strange, glowing sphere at the center of the room. The battle was quickly becoming a losing one. The Vecna were relentless, and the humans were outmatched in sheer firepower. Zarek, roaring in victory, stalked forward, clearly intent on taking them all down. But Lawson wasn't ready to surrender, not with the answers so close. "Clark, get to the sphere," Lawson shouted over the gunfire. "We need to know what it is." Clark nodded, her face pale but determined. She dashed toward the center of the chamber, the others covering her with gunfire. Zarek snarled, his glowing device still crackling with energy, but before he could fire another shot, a sudden deafening sound filled the chamber. An alien language, low and rumbling, as if the room itself were speaking. The sphere pulsed again, and suddenly, a holographic message flickered into existence, casting a greenish glow over the room. Clark froze, staring at the images that materialized in the air. Humans, but not in the clothes or styles she'd ever seen before. These were ancient figures, towering beings, each one radiating immense power. They were not just explorers, they were creators. One of the figures, a woman, spoke in a language that was long dead, but Clark understood it, thanks to the deciphering program she'd been running. "We are the architects. We seeded life across the stars." The weight of the revelation hit her like a physical blow. Humanity's role in the galaxy was not that of an upstart species struggling to find its place. It was the role of a creator, the first, the originators of all life. But before Clark could process the enormity of the discovery, the ground trembled again, and the Vecnor launched their final assault. The battle had only just begun. The chamber was a cacophony of noise, blaster fire, shouts, and the overwhelming hum of the ancient sphere at its center. Captain Lawson ducked behind a fallen column, his heart pounding. He glanced over at Professor Emily Clark, who was still standing near the sphere, eyes wide with shock as the holographic message continued to flicker in the air. Her fingers hovered over her tablet, trying desperately to stabilize the fluctuating data, but the scene unfolding was beyond anything she could have prepared for. "Clark, get down," Lawson shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Clark didn't move. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on the projections. She barely registered the sounds of the battle around her, her mind racing with the implications of the images swirling before her. The hologram, though primitive, was clear enough now. The architects, as the message identified them, were humans, human beings from an era far beyond anything Earth had ever recorded. They weren't just travelers or conquerors. They were creators, responsible for planting life across entire star systems. The figure of the woman, central to the projection, spoke again, her voice a low, commanding tone that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the ancient temple. "Our legacy is eternal. Our children, the stars themselves, are our gift to the universe, but they are also our burden. We abandoned them, and they abandoned us." Clark's breath caught in her throat. The architects, they're us, or rather, they were us, humanity, the first interstellar civilization. They didn't just colonize, they engineered life. The implications were staggering. The humans weren't merely part of the galactic tapestry. They had been the architects of life itself. The alien species scattered across the galaxy, the Vecnor, the Arctura, the Zorvok, they weren't just strangers. They were all descendants of humanity's ancient reach. This was why the galaxy's powers had suppressed human history for millennia. If anyone discovered the truth, the entire power structure would collapse. But before Clark could share the full scope of her findings, the Vecnor captain Zarak roared. He had flanked their position, and the next assault was imminent. "We need to leave, now," Lawson shouted. The fight was no longer just about survival. It was about preserving the truth. And the stakes were higher than anyone realized. The Vecnor advanced, their heavy footsteps echoing in the temple as Captain Jake Lawson fired a quick burst from his sidearm, forcing their attackers to take cover. But there were too many of them. The mercenaries were closing in fast, determined to capture or kill anyone standing in their way. "Clark," Lawson shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "You've got what you need. We're getting out of here." Clark barely heard him. She was still glued to the holographic message, her mind spinning. The architects, they weren't just creators, she muttered to herself, eyes locked on the projections. They're the first, the origin of every life form in the galaxy. And they disappeared, left everything behind. Lawson grabbed her arm, snapping her out of her trance. "We'll have time to analyze this later. Right now, we need to get to the shuttle. Now." Reluctantly, Clark tore her gaze from the flickering hologram. The once stunning projections of humanity's forgotten creators were fading, their last words still echoing in her mind. "We abandoned them, and they abandoned us." She couldn't shake the feeling that those words were a warning. "Let's move," Lawson urged, pushing her toward the entrance. The rest of the team was already in retreat, exchanging fire with the Vecnor forces as they fell back toward the shuttle landing pad. They only had minutes before the enemy would swarm them completely. The fight for survival was becoming more intense. They were in hostile territory, and every moment felt like it could be their last. But there was a larger, more ominous concern gnawing at Lawson's mind. The Vecnor were mercenaries. No matter how brutal, they were still just hired guns. But the revelation Clark had uncovered, that humanity was the first to seed life across the stars, suggested something far more troubling. As they reached the shuttle, Lawson looked at the others. They were in for more than just a fight for survival. They had uncovered a galaxy-shattering secret, and someone somewhere would do whatever it took to keep it buried. The Arctura, the galaxy's most powerful and secretive race, had been watching. And Lawson could feel it. Everything was about to change. The Shuttle Odyssey blasted off from the surface of Erebus 9, its engines roaring as the ancient ruins disappeared beneath them, swallowed by the vastness of space. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, heavy with the weight of what they had uncovered. Captain Jake Lawson stood at the front, hands gripping the console as his mind raced. The images of humanity's forgotten past, the architects, the seeded worlds, the genetic blueprints that spanned across the stars, kept replaying in his head. What did it all mean? What did it mean for Earth? Behind him, Professor Emily Clark was hunched over her tablet, furiously typing, trying to decode the last bits of the holographic data. Her fingers flew across the screen, but her face was pale, her eyes clouded with the gravity of their discovery. "Do you think it's possible?" Clark's voice was distant, as if she were talking to herself. "Could we really be the origin of all this? The first ones, the ones who shaped life across the galaxy?" Lawson didn't answer immediately. His mind was elsewhere, back on Erebus 9, still haunted by the words of the message. "We abandoned them, and they abandoned us." The architects had created life, but they had disappeared. Why? Had they truly left their creations behind, or was something else at play here? And why had the Arctura, who had kept humanity in the dark for so long, gone to such extremes to suppress this knowledge? "Captain," came Lieutenant Marco Sanchez's voice, breaking through Lawson's thoughts. "We've received a message. It's encrypted." Lawson looked up, his brow furrowing. "From whom?" "Unknown source," Sanchez replied, voice tight with caution. "But it's a warning. It says the Arctura know you found it, and they won't let you leave Erebus 9 alive." The blood in Lawson's veins ran cold. The Arctura, the galaxy's most advanced and secretive race, had been watching them, waiting for them to uncover the truth. And now they were going to make sure that humanity's past stayed buried. "Get us to the fleet," Lawson ordered. "We're not going to let them silence us." The battle for the galaxy's future had begun. The U.S. Aegis was a fortress in space now, bristling with advanced weaponry and reinforced shields. But it wasn't just the technology that made it a formidable force. It was the knowledge they carried. The truth of humanity's ancient past, a secret that had been buried for millennia. The fleet had gathered, drawn together by a common cause, the truth of the architects, the creators of life, and humanity's role as the first interstellar civilization. Captain Jake Lawson paced the bridge, eyes fixed on the holographic map of the galaxy. The Arctura had made their move, launching covert strikes against human colonies and key positions in the galaxy, attempting to quell the rising resistance. But their actions had only sparked something greater, a wildfire of revolt among the galaxy's oppressed species. The Vecna, Thizorvik, and even factions of the Xathor were aligning with humanity, understanding the gravity of the revelation. They were all descendants of human genetic engineering, and the Arctura had been suppressing that truth for generations. "Captain, all ships report in," Commander Sarah Richards said, her voice calm but urgent. "We're ready. The fleet is at full strength, and the resistance is growing stronger by the hour." Lawson nodded, but his mind was still on Erebus 9, on the words of the architects. "We abandoned them, and they abandoned us." Those words haunted him. What had happened to the architects? Why had they vanished, leaving their creations to scatter across the stars, never knowing their true origin? And what would happen now, with humanity at the helm of a new galactic order? "We can't let the Arctura rewrite history," Lawson said, his voice low. "Not again." Professor Emily Clark stepped forward, her face determined. "This isn't just about preserving humanity's legacy anymore. It's about building a future where the galaxy can move beyond the lies, where every species, Every life form knows the truth. We are all connected. The fleet was poised for action. The galaxy stood on the brink of change. The Arctura might have once been the galaxy's rulers, but they were now the ones who had everything to lose. Set course for the cradle of Genesis, Lawson ordered, his voice steady. We finish what we started. The battle ahead would determine the future of the galaxy, not just for humanity, but for every species that had been shaped by the hands of the architects. And this time, no one would silence the truth.